Especially when you don't know where you're going.
Well, that's right. I think most Pittsburghers don't know that the 4th Avenue corridor in Oakland area is the 3rd most congested thoroughfare in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But we're too busy building special conduits to the north side because they're Steelers to worry about. That's a subject for another day. Well, I want to start off, sir, by saying I do not represent any group or organization. I'm here. I was contacted by Mr. Patrick Nightingale, who I do believe does represent an organization, but I'm not a member of that group. And I was pleased to hear from him, receive his invitation, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity. I am a forensic pathologist, and I have been doing autopsies since I started my training in pathology in 1957. I finished my 5 years of pathology training, which came after a year of internship and, of course, 4 years of medical school in 1962. For the past 48 years, I've been working as a private forensic pathologist, hospital pathologist, government pathologist, and medical legal forensic scientific consultant for attorneys and organizations throughout the country, doing autopsies, including some in foreign countries. I myself have done about 17,000 autopsies in these 53 years, going back to 57. And I have reviewed, supervised, or signed off on about 36,000 additional autopsies. As I sit here before you, sir, I have never signed out a case of death due to acute marijuana or acute cannabinoid toxicity, not one. Nor have I seen in the 36,000 other cases such a diagnosis as the cause of death. I've seen references to acute cannabinoid toxicity based upon the level of THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol found in the post-mortem toxicological analyses, but just as a kind of an incidental finding. With all due respect to my colleagues in medicine, all the clinicians, whether they are the pediatricians, internists, neurologists, psychiatrists, and then psychologists, and then the sociologists, etc., who have valid opinions. I'm not suggesting that mine is more erudite or intellectually cognizant than theirs. However, I do believe that the most significant determinant in talking about things that are relevant and important in the medical sphere are death, mortality, and morbidity. That's the bottom line. The rest of the stuff is interesting and exciting and relevant and intellectually challenging, but let's get down to what kills people. So here I'm sitting, and I do autopsies currently. I'm before a coroner of Allegheny County, but not now. I do autopsies for coroners in 4 surrounding counties. About 40% of the autopsies that I do for these 4 counties are cases of acute combined drug toxicity. 2 to 8 drugs. You can just right across the board. These are the drugs that are killing. And the fascinating irony, and if it weren't so serious, it would almost be ludicrous and humorous, is that these drugs are all legal. I love it when the news media people, and many of whom I have a chance to deal with nationally on these shows, and they start off by saying that so-and-so died and no illicit drugs were found. What they mean is that all the drugs that were found were prescribed. So that means everything's okay. Well, no, people aren't dying that many now from heroin. You know, shoot them up in the back alley in the middle of the night in some area of a metropolitan zone. They're dying from drugs like the various analgesics that are all legal. Morphine and Demerol and fentanyl and pantopon and methadone, and then the new ones, Vicodin and Vicodin, and so on. These are powerful drugs. I mean, you know, I remember taking one of these drugs. I had some kind of a knee or ankle problem and so on. And my wife was telling me later on the restaurant, everybody was looking at me like I was totally spaced out. We went to a movie that night, movie I wanted to see very much, JFK, which had something to deal with, and I didn't know a thing. I didn't even know I'd been in a movie. I mean, these are powerful drugs. Then you have all the tranquilizers, and you have all the antidepressants, then all the anxiolytic drugs. These are the drugs that are killing people. They're not limited to Anna Nicole Smith and her son Daniel Smith, or Michael Jackson, or Heath Ledger. These are drugs that are found with everyday people, you know, you and me and our neighbors and our friends. So nobody knows about it because we're not Anna Nicole Smith and Michael Jackson. We're just plain ordinary folks. So the idea of restricting a drug which can have therapeutic medicinal purposes in specific instances, which does not lead to morbidity and mortality, just makes no sense when all these other drugs are accepted and are out there. Medical marijuana prescribed in appropriate fashion for people with metastatic malignancies, carcinomas, and other kinds of diseases, lymphomas, sarcomas, etc. People with advanced AIDS, HIV, people with severe glaucoma, people with various neurological disorders like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou disease, and so on. There have been proven benefits. They're ameliorative. They're not curative. But they help these people, and they ease their physical and emotional pain and suffering. It makes no sense at all to withhold this drug. I believe that the basis, Representative Myers, for this, especially people of my generation, much more so than nowadays, and they don't even realize it, is we were inculcated with this propaganda that emanated from Washington, D.C. There's a guy named Harry Anslinger, and he was the federal czar. And he was interested essentially only in marijuana. Why? While heroin was out there, it was viewed as a problem for African Americans. This was just something that blacks were doing in ghetto areas. But marijuana, now it's getting into our high schools, and it's affecting the little girls and boys and so on. I remember I grew up in what we call the Hill District, and used to walk up and play ball at the Iron Coffin Settlement, and there were two movie houses up there. One was called the Roosevelt, and I remember, as if I saw it yesterday, it's a picture with a pretty little girl, and of course in those days it was just incredible. Her skirt was 2 inches above the knee. I mean, but that was, you know, and the name of the movie was Reefer Madness. And this is what was sold, and this is the philosophy, the attitude. If you go to older people and you ask them, well, what is your problem? What is your hang-up, man? Marijuana, you know, it's a terrible, horrible drug. And I think that we have to get over that mindset. There are, I think, 14 states as of this time who have adopted this kind of legalized utilization of marijuana. As you know, in California, they're pushing for total legalization. In some other countries of the world, they've done that. In many of the Western nations, which we would think of in a comparable sense to ours from an overall socio-political, economic fashion, England, Italy, Israel, and so on, so that, you know, the marijuana has been used legally and so on. I'm not here to suggest that we become another Maastricht, Amsterdam, Holland, where people line up and to buy marijuana like they're buying a pack of cigarettes. I'm not suggesting that, but I do think the time has come for us to get over this hang-up for which there is no sound, pathological, clinical, experiential basis, and say that marijuana should be available on a legalized basis prescribed by physicians. Now, it's going to be a step-by-step procedure, and I think eventually, similar to alcohol and prohibition, people will come to realize that the drug should not be criminalized at all. But, you know, taking it one step at a time and addressing in focused fashion upon House Bill 1393, which you and your colleagues are dealing with, you know, this, I think, is the subject for the day. So I urge the Pennsylvania legislature, beginning with your committee and the General Assembly and the State Senate, to adopt this. I know that Pennsylvania, because I've been involved in the medical legal field in various fashions and context, that we have not been among the leaders in a lot of things which I've considered to be appropriate and necessary. But eventually we get there. And so I would suggest, in the words of a wise philosopher, whose name I think was perhaps never even identified, or if it was, I've forgotten it or never knew it, and that is, be not among the first by whom the new is tried, nor yet the last to lay the old aside. 14 states have gone out there. Schwarzenegger, a good solid Republican, is pushing for total legalization. And in that context, and I'll close, I appreciate your patience. I want to say I have submitted to you, sir, and to your colleagues, a few things and comments of my own, and then some interesting articles you'll see by top-notch people, big psychiatrists, something referencing the use of marijuana as it has been approached and dealt with by a large national Jewish organization, getting into the religious field, and so on. And something that I do want to point out that I think is very pertinent, as you said in your opening remarks, what do you folks in Pittsburgh think, that both newspapers, sir, not only the New York Times and USA Today, yes, they've editorialized also. Both newspapers, sir, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Pittsburgh Tribune Review have editorialized. Now, the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, a very solid, conservative newspaper, but in a responsible fashion, they have an editorial from July 29th of last year, legalize marijuana, which is, I think, the strongest editorial. They just said it's time to legalize marijuana. Note, we did not say it's time to decriminalize, and we did not say it's time to legalize nationwide for medicinal purposes only. It's time to flat out legalize the production, possession, sale, and use of marijuana. And they refer to, I'm not of that political ilk, although I have many friends and respect the Tribune Review, but within that group of responsible conservatives, the two foremost icons, I think, if you took a vote among those people, would be William Buckley and Milton Friedman, both of whom are quoted in this editorial with regard to the issue of marijuana. So for those people who are reticent, and I don't get into politics, Democrat, Republican, but I have read, and I'm not talking about your committee, I'm not talking about Pennsylvania, but I know in some other states, some of the more conservative lawmakers, while not intellectually attempting to defend the continuing ban on marijuana, have been extremely reticent in going along with its legalization for medicinal purposes because they are fearful of what their constituents will believe. Well, poll after poll has shown that that simply is not true. The public acceptance of medical marijuana continues to grow each and every time. And no better example of that, in my opinion, certainly in Pittsburgh, and I don't speak for the Tribune Review, their editorial speaks for themselves. And I hope that you'll have a chance to read it, because nothing can be more dynamic and forceful than that wonderful editorial. And then the Post-Gazette, a very strong editorial too, some 6 months later last year. So with that, I'm open if you have any questions, sir, or anything you'd like me to comment upon. I'd be happy to